look at the political landscape in this midterm election year. Thank you for joining us for Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder. Well, as the country looks to the looming midterms this fall, a small bipartisan group of lawmakers is looking back to reform the Electoral Count Act. They're doing it with a standalone bill, separate from the Democrats' push to advance voting rights. Some believe it's the key to last year's Capitol attack. CBN's Caitlin Burke explains.
In short, the Electoral Count Act lays out how Congress should count electoral college votes from each state, especially when there's a dispute. That happened in the 1876 presidential election.
There were a lot of allegations of fraud in that election. 4 states ended up sending 2 different slates of electors to Congress.
A decade later, the Electoral Count Act established a joint session of Congress to oversee the counting of electoral votes. During that process, any written objection to the votes from at least 1 House member and 1 senator sends lawmakers back to their respective houses to consider the objection. The power to sustain or overrule it is placed fully with Congress. That played out after the 2020 election. The law is back in the spotlight because former President Donald Trump and others insist Vice President Mike Pence had the power to throw out certain election results.
They were hoping that there would be objections made under the act by a member of the House and a member of the Senate to the electoral votes coming from particular states, places like Georgia and Arizona, and then there would be a debate about whether they should be sustained or overruled. They were all overruled. And so the vice president did not have the power to then somehow change what the Senate had decided, what the House had decided. I think there were folks hoping he would do that, but he just didn't have the power to do it, neither under the statute nor under the Constitution.
Hans von Spakovsky, an election integrity expert with the Heritage Foundation, says the vice president's role in certifying election results is purely ministerial, which means he really doesn't have any power at all, a point Pence himself recently addressed.
I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
While Spakovsky sees 2020 as an example of the Electoral Count Act working, a bipartisan group of lawmakers feel the law needs to be clarified.
We saw on January 6th of 2021 how ambiguities in the law were exploited. We need to prevent that from happening again.
What really caused the insurrection? They thought there was a kind of ambiguity, if you will, and there was an avenue they could go through and maybe overturn the election, because it was not clear. And when one congressman and one senator can bring a state's authentic count to a halt, it's wrong.
Senator Manchin says he's confident a bill reforming the Electoral Count Act will pass. Spakovsky disagrees, saying an amendment would not have prevented what happened on January 6th.
Many of the people who were protesting would have been unhappy about anything that happened, any process, unless President Trump was declared the winner of the election.
Meanwhile, some Democrats worry that a focus on just the Electoral Count Act could reduce urgency to pass through some larger voting rights bills. And Republicans worry Democrats could try and use the process to work in some of the measures they haven't been able to get through Congress. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, looking ahead to the 2024 presidential election, Republicans have a deep bench of possible candidates. At this point, the most popular by far is Donald Trump. If the former president announces that he will run, it will make an indelible impact on the GOP race. David Brody explains.
It comes as no surprise that most of the 2024 conversation centers on Donald Trump. He's been strongly hinting at another run for president. He certainly sounded like a contender when I spoke to him a few months ago. Again.
MAGA Nation wants you to run again. I know you get it asked all the time. Let me ask it a different way. What will make you not run in 2024? In other words, what would be a reason not to run?
I guess a bad call from a doctor or something, right? You get that call and say, hey, sir, how you doing? Come on down here and see us because we got a bad report, right?
I pray for my president.
Through God, they happen. And but I feel I feel so good, and I hate what's happening to our country.
If Trump runs, that would likely clear a few people off the board. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley tells CBN News that will definitely be a game changer. What if he runs in 2024? How do you feel about that?
I mean, I've said that, if he runs in 2024, I'm not going to run. I appreciate the fact that he gave me the opportunity to serve the country I love so much. But at the same time, I think that's a big conversation that he needs to think about and that he needs to have in terms of whether he wants to do that.
The most intriguing 2024 question is whether former Vice President Mike Pence enters the ring. He's come under a torrent of criticism from Trump and his followers. Although visits to early primary states have most political observers thinking he'll run. In our recent interview with him, he played dodgeball. If Donald Trump ends up running in 2024, I've talked to Nikki Haley about this on camera. I've talked to Kristi Noem. Both will say they're not going to run if he runs. What is your view on that at this point? If you were thinking about running, would you not run as well?
David, you and I have known each other a long time.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that for right now, my focus is entirely on doing everything in my power to support the conservative cause and win back the Congress and state houses all across this country in 2022. Right. We'll let the future take care of itself after that, and I promise to keep you posted.
While waiting for news on that front, you can't keep up with the GOP players without a scorecard monitoring other candidates. For many, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tops the list, followed in no particular order by Senators Ted Cruz, Tim Scott, and Tom Cotton, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, and Mike Pompeo. The former Secretary of State has been making serious rounds in key states like Iowa and New Hampshire.
There'll be some decisions that everyone has to make, including myself and my wife, and we'll do that on the right timetable.
The ultimate wild card is, of course, Donald Trump. Recent polls show him with a commanding 43-point lead over his closest challenger, Ron DeSantis. 54% of Republicans choose Trump, 11% DeSantis, 8% Mike Pence. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
As Ohio goes, so goes the nation. What the race for Ohio's governor could mean for this year's midterm elections and beyond. Welcome back. We are not a Republican state, we're a Trump state. That's the position of one GOP candidate for governor of Ohio. In races across the country, Republican incumbents are facing primary challenges from within their own party. What happens in those races could be a sign of where the party's headed. Heather Sells reports on the GOP gubernatorial race in Ohio.
Governor Mike DeWine is running for re-election, but standing in his way, a wave of challengers closely aligned with former President Trump. It is an inter-party battle that mimics the divide in the national GOP. Mike DeWine has served Ohio as a U.S. congressman, senator, and now governor. He sat down with CBN News to talk about his re-election bid and one of the highlights of the last year.
Well, it was a great victory to get Intel here.
In December, chipmaker Intel announced a $20 billion complex near Columbus, the state's biggest economic development package ever. DeWine says it sends a signal.
If you're thinking about moving or you're thinking about expanding, you need to look at Ohio.
As of last month, DeWine also had big money, $9 million in the bank to appeal to voters before the May 3rd primary and beyond. Right now, he's well ahead in the polls with 34 and even 40%, giving him up to an 18-point lead over his challengers, former Congressman Jim Renacci and farmer Joe Blystone.
People are tired. They're looking for somebody on the outside.
I see a state in Ohio that is does not have strong leadership.
Despite trailing DeWine in fundraising and the polls, Renacci and Blystone see an opening. They're counting on primary voters who identify more with Trump-style republicanism, and they're hoping for a Trump endorsement.
I do believe that in Ohio, we're not a Republican state, we're a Trump state.
One thing I'll say forcefully, President Trump is still my president. I don't think Biden won this past 2020 election.
DeWine says he'd welcome a Trump endorsement, even though he's not been afraid to call him out. On January 7th,
After the Capitol riots, DeWine went after the president.
This incendiary speech yesterday that he gave to the protesters served only to fan those flames.
Renacci has targeted DeWine for that, while both he and Blystone are attacking the governor's COVID policies. Ohio was the first state to cancel a large event and close schools, and DeWine has faced criticism for closing businesses and his mask orders.
We're tired of the mask mandates that this governor was pushing.
Blystone, who farms and owns a restaurant, says the governor's orders forced him to close for 8 weeks.
My employees rely on me to receive a paycheck so they can take care of their families, and when we have to shut down and we can't carry them through, that bothers me a lot.
These three candidates do share similar views on Republican priorities, be it the economy, schools, immigration, abortion, or gun laws. And they're very aware that in these polarized times, politics, as usual, will not suffice when it comes to governing.
It used to be, at least if you were right or left or middle, we could at least sit down and have a cup of coffee and have a conversation.
I had friends on both sides of the aisle, but I also believe that friendship means that you have to have the ability to be able to talk and work in a civil manner. And I'm hoping we can get back to that.
DeWine, despite tangling with Trump, says it's time to look forward.
I think it's important for us to focus on the 2022 race.
He's also upbeat about bringing the country back together.
We're a resilient people. We're a strong people. So, we're going to be okay. We just have to continue to remind ourselves that, what pulls us together as a people is much, much more than what divides us.
How the candidates position themselves in relation to the former president could mean everything in this race, with the stakes especially high in this battleground state. Reporting in Columbus, Heather Sell, CBN News.
The civil war within the GOP, how the former president has caused a split in the Republican Party. After this. Well, when Donald Trump entered politics, he became a lightning rod that split the Republican Party. Today, the former president remains a contentious figure in the party, as well as a major player. David Brody brings us this look at the factions inside the GOP and their possible impact on the future.
The days of Ronald Reagan seem long gone in today's Republican Party. The iconic Republican president was fond of saying that the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor. Well, that's certainly not the case today within the GOP. The 2020 election changed everything.
Mitch McConnell didn't have the courage to challenge the election.
And with that, dividing lines were drawn, with Republicans like Congresswoman Liz Cheney on one side.
We must speak the truth. Our election was not stolen.
And Senate candidates like Ohio's Josh Mandel on the other.
I believe this election was stolen from Donald J. Trump.
Mandel and many others believe that is the winning stance in today's GOP.
There's only one candidate in this race for U.S. Senate who's willing to say that the election was stolen from Donald J. Trump. And I'm willing to say that because it's the truth. And I have guts and backbone and a steel spine. And I don't care if the liberal media attacks me.
Mandel seems to have strong backing on that side of the GOP. Current polls show 57% of Republicans saying they will not vote for any GOP candidate who agrees that Joe Biden won the election fair and square. And then there's January 6th. Recently, Trump said if he runs and regains the presidency, he'd look at pardoning those convicted of crimes at the U.S. Capitol that day. Republican Lindsey Graham strongly disagrees.
I think it's inappropriate. I don't want to reinforce that defiling the Capitol was okay.
Trump fired back.
Well, Lindsey Graham's wrong. I mean, Lindsey's a nice guy, but he's a rhino.
And so that's where we are in today's GOP. Republican congressmen who have been reliable conservative votes over the years are now called rhinos. Republicans in name only. The label has been bestowed on U.S. Senator Mitt Romney and others who joined Democrats to pass the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. I asked Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDowell about the name-calling in a recent interview.
So how do you kind of define rhino? I feel like that's changed over the years. Do you think that definition has changed in recent years? It seems like who was a rhino years ago.
I'm not as into dividing right now because we need everyone to go in against the Democrats. And I know everybody focuses on inter-party stuff, and that'll work out in the primaries. The RNC has to stay neutral in primaries.
Yet the RNC clearly recognizes where the momentum and energy is right now in the Republican Party. And that's why there is a proposal to remove Republicans Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger from the House Republican Conference due to their vocal support of the January 6th committee. The big mo, as in money, is also squarely with Donald Trump. His political operation starts the year with $122 million in the bank, much of it from small donations. It appears his post-election rhetoric has made him stronger. Some candidates running in the midterms credit Trump for changing the GOP message.
It's become more of a populist party. It's no longer kind of like your grandfather's Republican Party.
And thank God. You know, unfortunately, the generations before us took pride in voting for conservatives, took pride in voting for Republicans, but they were getting the wool pulled over their eyes in Washington, and people were just voting down the line for people that essentially sold them up the river, moderate Republicans that would vote with the Chamber of Commerce and totally abandon some of what we find as core morals and ethics.
Even President Biden understands Trump's gravitational pull, which he believes has prevented him from getting Republican support.
Did you ever think that one man out of office could intimidate an entire party where they're unwilling to take any vote contrary to what he thinks should be taken for fear of being defeated in a primary? I've had 5 Republican senators talk to me, bump into me, quote unquote, or sit with me, who've told me that they agree with whatever I'm talking about for them to do. But Joe, if I do it, I'm going to defeat it in a primary.
I discussed the state of the GOP with Pennsylvania congressional candidate Kathy Barnett.
How do you see the Republican Party? Is Trump kind of a litmus test for Republicans today?
You know, I mean, some say they are, but listen, we have, D.C. is a swamp, and in every swamp you have alligators, and you have some alligators that are on a rock sunbathing, and then you have other alligators that are right up on you. Democrats are the alligators that are right up on us. So we need to be real focused, real clear. Don't focus on the alligator on the rock sunbathing. Focus on the alligator that is right up on us and is about to destroy our country.
There's no doubt something is in the water that's led to a shift in the Republican current. The question remains whether it will lead to the much talked about wave that could retake the majority in November. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Healing divisions on Capitol Hill. How one group says God is moving among Americans' leaders on Capitol Hill when we return. If any place needs hope these days, it is Capitol Hill. And now it's coming in the form of a ministry bridging the Great Divide in Washington, D.C. Its mission to provide prayer and pastoral support to everyone holding office in our nation's capital. Abigail Robertson has the story.
People often come to Washington, D.C. wanting something from lawmakers or to criticize them. At Hope to the Hill, however, the goal is to encourage, support, and minister to these powerful and stressed politicians.
The whole idea is that we're focusing on their faith journey, how things are going for them in their lives, and they see that we're not asking questions about how they feel about this issue or that issue.
The only thing Nathan Kistler and George Roller want from members of Congress is to build relationships and pray with them.
And so many members, when you go into their office, like George just said, you walk in, they say, well, what can I do for you today? And we say, we don't want anything from you. We just want to know how we can pray for you. And it is amazing to see members. I've had anything from they kind of shrug a little bit to crying because they've never had anybody come into their office and ask them.
As a nonpartisan organization, Hope to the Hill steers clear of talking politics.
But it is a divided moment in American history. And so there's a few things to me that are transcending beyond party lines, politics, all those things. And one of the most important ones is prayer.
That approach has also helped them cross party lines to create prayer partners.
We can circle that House chamber together, Republican and Democrat, and seek God's face in the midst of everything else that's going on.
Representative Kathy McMorris-Rogers tells CBN News she appreciates their ministry today more than ever before.
To be reminded of the spiritual battle and the importance of prayer, the importance of reading the Word of God and putting on the armor of God and being more aware of what God might be doing in the course of a day or a conversation, and bringing it back to being his defender, his ambassador here on Capitol Hill day in and day out.
Hope to the Hill also trains lawmakers on how to share their faith with others.
One of the members in that group that day told me the next day that he used what he had learned. He shared faith with another member of Congress, and that person prayed to receive Christ.
George adds he once gave a Bible to a non-believer, and it sat unused on his desk for over a year.
One day, he had a brief moment, which is rare for members of Congress. He actually had a few moments. He opened it. He was fascinated. He'd never read the Bible before. He began to read, and then he began to read more and more. Through that process, he came to faith in Christ. Since then, after that, he went to Bible college in his city, and now he preaches on Sundays when he's at home, and he's still a very beloved member of this Congress, and he loves Jesus.
George and Nathan also recommend believers call their representatives to offer encouragement.
And just say, hey, I'm praying for you. God loves you. I love you. And we appreciate the work that you do. And build a relationship.
George and Nathan see Washington, D.C. as one of the most valuable and fertile mission fields on the planet. They want to share the hope that no matter how divided things appear, God is raising up a mighty remnant of people in America's capital. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
And that is a good word, and one we will leave it on this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.